Hello and welcome. I'm Dave. Today we're going to learn about NestJS DTO validation and error handling, and I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. I'll also provide a link for you to join my Discord server where you can discuss web development with other students, and you can ask questions that I can answer and receive help from other viewers too. I look forward to seeing you there. This tutorial is lesson 4 of a NestJS series, and today's starting code is the completed source code from lesson 3. If you haven't watched the previous lesson, there's a link to the playlist for this series in the video description, and I recommend you start at the beginning as each lesson will build on the ones before it. In the previous lessons, we have set up a REST API with endpoints for users' data. I just pressed Control in the backtick. Let's go ahead and start up that REST API in dev mode with npm run start :dev. That should start up our server in dev mode. And with the server running, let's check back here at our script and notice, of course, that it also has the watch flag. So anytime we make changes to our files, it's going to restart the server and keep it running for us. So our REST API is running, but we have no data validation for the requests that come in, and that can cause problems. Let's quickly look with Thunder Client. And here I'm going to look at a request to the user's endpoint, and I can just send a value for role. Here I'm going to just type my name in all caps, so role Dave. We know that doesn't exist, and if I request that, we get back an empty array. That's not really ideal. We'd like to fix that. What if we go to the endpoint where we can get a user, say we wanted user 1, but let's send something like a couple of lowercase letters instead, and we send that, and it's a status okay, we just don't get anything back. That's not ideal either. And you can see we're going to continue to have problems with all of these endpoints if we don't send the correct data, because nothing is validating that or causing an error to send any message back to the user that says what is wrong. So we need to fix that today. And we're in the NestJS docs looking at pipes. Now, pipes are a specific type of middleware, and I'll scroll down just a little bit, and it says pipes have 2 typical use cases: transformation, so transforming data, or validation. Now, we'll be doing both today. Let's look at some quick examples. I want to go to built-in pipes, and there's a couple of pipes here in this list that we're going to use. One is the validation pipe, the other is the parse_int pipe. So let's head back to VS Code. Back in VS Code, we're in the users controller. So I've opened up my source directory and then the users directory where we've created all of our users files. And then I am in the users controller file. From there, we want to import that parse_int pipe, and it comes from NestJS Common, just like all of these others that we have imported here at the top of this file. Now, after that, we need to go ahead and bind it to the method. In other words, we're inserting the pipe as middleware into a route handler. So let's look at how that works. So in any of these route handlers that needed the unary plus that we had previously used, we can use the parse_int pipe. And let's do that by implementing it right here in the find one. So after our param decorator, and then we pass in the ID, let's put a comma, and then we'll say parse_int pipe, and we're inserting that pipe right there. Now we'll no longer need that unary plus either, but we still have an issue with TypeScript because it's saying, hey, this is supposed to be a string here. Now we need to change this because it will be a number, and TypeScript agrees that it will be a number. That's because this parse_int pipe is transforming that data as we talked about. Now let's go ahead and make these changes to the other 2 route handlers that also were using that unary plus. So let's scroll down to our update because we had to send the ID there as well. So we'll add in our parse_int pipe, and then we'll change that type here to a number as well for the ID. And after that, we can remove the unary plus as well. Let's do the same for the delete route handler. So here this would be parse_int pipe. We'll change this to a number type here, and then we can remove the plus as well, and then save the file. So let's go ahead and test one or more of these out. We'll go back to Thunder Client. I'll pull up our requests here, and now I'm going to send a AA once again to that find one route. And remember, we put the parse_int pipe on this route. I'll send. Now we get a 400 bad request, and we get a specific message. It says validation failed. The numeric string is expected, or numeric string is expected. So yes, it needs to be a number. Of course, it's still a string, so it says numeric string. That's a very specific message, and the double A's will no longer work. But if I go ahead and send the number 1, then yes, we get user number 1. And of course, we could expect that same behavior to be on the other 2 route handlers that we, of course, applied the parse int pipe to as well. So the parse int pipe transforms those string numbers to numeric data. And it also validates the request data because we receive an error if we send letters instead of numbers. However, we still need to validate data when we create a new user or update a user. And we can begin fixing these issues by creating data transfer object schemas, or DTOs, for the data we expect to receive from the request. So let's take another look at the docs. We are back in the NestJS docs, and I'm looking at request payloads under the controller page here in the overview section, and they show an example of a DTO they're going to create. And they also discuss why they use classes as well. Now note, DTO stands for Data Transfer Object. And then, of course, they say schema afterwards, because that's essentially what we're doing, is creating a schema for our data. So you can see their create_cat.dto.ts file here, and it has a name that's a string, an age that's a number, a breed that's a string. So essentially, we're creating a type or a schema here. They're calling it a DTO, and they're using a class because we're in NestJS and they base most everything on classes. So let's follow this same pattern back in VS Code and create a user DTO. I'm back in VS Code. We want to create a DTO folder inside of our users folder, or directory, if you will. And here we'll call this DTO. And now inside of our DTO directory, the first file we create is going to be create-user.dto.ts. Now inside, this is fairly simple. We'll say export class, then we say create user DTO. And now inside of our class, we'll have a name that is a string, and we're going to have an email that is a string, and then we're going to have a role. If you remember, we receive all of this data. Now, why don't we have an ID here? That's because we create the ID after we receive this data. This is a DTO, or data transfer object, for the data we will be receiving in the request. And of course, the role has 3 possible values. We had intern, or it could be engineer, or it could be admin. But we also need a DTO for our update user. But before we do, we need to look at the docs one more time. Back in the NestJS docs, I'm now under the techniques header and validation, and it says when building input validation types, also called DTOs, so that is what we are doing, then it says it's useful to build and create and update, variations on the same type. Now, for example, the create variant may require all fields, while the update variant, and that's the one we need to create now, doesn't require all of those fields. Essentially, we need a partial type, kind of like TypeScript again, right? So that's what we're going to do, but they show a great way to do this. Here is that create cat DTO again, that same example, but when we scroll down, it says by default, all of the fields above are required. But now below, we can extend that type we have, the create cat DTO, with the partial type. And that's all we're going to need to do for our update class. We don't need to type out the same types again. So we're going to create an update class by extending the create class we have using the partial type function. Let's go back and follow this same pattern in our code. Back in VS Code, I need to create another new file inside the DTO directory. So I'll click New File, and I want this to be update. I need all lowercase here. Update-user.dto.ts. Now to start this out, we need to import our create user DTO that we previously made. Then we also need to import partial type, and that is going to come from at NestJS/mapped types, and that is not installed by default. And I just remembered that we need to go ahead and add that dependency as well. I'll press Control and the back tick to once again open up a terminal. I'm going to temporarily do Control C to close down our dev server, and we'll add this dependency and start it back up. So now I'm going to type npm I, and then I want at NestJS /mapped-types. And from there, we're also going to say -D, because this would be a dev dependency. So let's press enter. Should install this to our project fairly quickly. Then we'll go ahead and restart that server. I'm going to press my up arrow just to get my previous commands. There's my npm run start :dev. Go ahead and press enter. Restarts the dev server. Everything should be working once again. And now we no longer have the squiggly under our partial type import here at the top, because now it has the dependency that it comes from, which is the NestJS /mapped-types. And I've worked with Next.js some this week, so if I've said one instead of the other, I apologize. It's easy to get switched up between Nest.js and Next.js, two completely different things. So now let's create this class by typing export class, and we want to say update user DTO extends. Now we use our partial type function, and inside of the partial type, we pass in our create user DTO, but we're not quite finished. This would still be an error right now. We just need empty curly brackets at the end, and then you can save the file, and it's complete. So we extend and we get all of the benefits of the create user DTO, except not any one particular field is required. We can use that partial type, which is perfect for our update route handler. So we've created our DTOs, but we aren't using them yet. So we need to add them to the controller and then to the service provider. We're going to do both of those, and you can already tell the benefit will be having our types all in one place. So I'll go to the user's controller first. We'll scroll to the top, and we need to go ahead and import our DTOs. So we'll say import create user DTO, and then after that, we'll go ahead and import update user DTO. Now that we have both of those, let's apply them in the file. We need to go down to our create method that we have in our post route. And now instead of having our type typed out here for user, we can switch that and we can just put in our create user DTO. And that brings in the type. Now a pattern you would commonly see here, instead of this being called user, for example, you might see also create user DTO with a lowercase in the spot of user here, and then that would be passed in, or user is passed in there. And so you would see this, but this still represents the user. So either way you do that is fine. I just wanted to point that out. That is a typical pattern. So I'm going to leave it and switch these as we go. So now in our patch route here with the update function, we can do the same thing. We have user update, and then we have this long type typed out. And instead, we can bring in our update user DTO and put it right there. And then we could follow that same pattern with a lowercase update, and then user DTO here still represents the user. So I'll copy that and replace the user update that we had and just put it right there. Still represents the same thing. And now let's go to our service provider, and in the user service provider we can import these at the top again. So we will import create user DTO, and after that we will import update user DTO. And then we need to put both of these in the functions that use them as well. So we had our create function here. Let me press Alt-Z to wrap that down. Once again, we can replace this long type that we manually had to type, and we're storing it all in one place now, which is our create user DTO. And then we could switch this to follow that same pattern where it says user here, it would be create user DTO, and you're starting with the lowercase create user, but then you need to replace where we had the user inside of our function logic as well, and it was right here where we spread the user. So that should fix that, and we're following that same pattern that you will likely see somewhere else, which is why I'd like to introduce that. And then in the update area, we have the same thing where we're replacing the type that was there, and now it is our update user DTO. And we're switching updated user, so I'll Control D to select both, and we'll switch this to update user DTO, starting out lowercase, which represents the updated user once again. With our controller and our service provider both updated, we are now using those DTOs to replace those types that we had to type out more than once. And that's a good benefit, but they're still not really validating anything. They're still just pretty much doing the same job that TypeScript does. So we need to apply some validation as well. Back in the NestJS docs once again, we're under the overview section on the pipes page, and it's talking about an implementation of validation. And it says Nest works well with the class-validator library. So we're going to add a couple more dependencies. These won't be dev dependencies. We'll list those amongst our production dependencies. So we'll add those in just a second, but I want to show you the example once again with their create_cat DTO class. They are bringing in some new decorators from this class-validator dependency that we add, but we also need, note, the class-transformer dependency because they work together. So we'll have both of those. But we'll import the decorators from class-validator, and then inside of our DTO, we can apply validation to each one of our data types that we have, and it will check for things like is int, is string. We can even check things to see like if we have an email or not. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of definitions. And just to show a few, I'm here on the GitHub page for that library, and I'm going to put a link to this inside of the course resources as well, so you can reference this. Any of these validation decorators that you would need will be in this library for you after we have added it as a dependency. So let's go back to VS Code and put this to use. We're back in VS Code. I'm going to open a terminal window, Control-C once again to stop the server, and I'll just add these dependencies quickly. So npm I, and then we want class-validator, and then a space, and we can also say class-transformer, press enter. Both of these should be added to our project fairly quickly. And yes, they are. We can double check that in the package JSON if we want to, and it should be not in scripts, but here in dependencies, we see class transformer and class validator now. So that's what we need. From there, it looks like I didn't save something inside of our controller. I'll quickly do that as well. Now from there, let's go back to the DTO and we can apply these. Okay, at the top of the file, we need to import the decorators that we're going to use. So I'm going to import is email, and that comes from class validator. So let's just apply that one first. And of course, that's going to go on the email. I'm going to leave a couple of spaces there. Then we use the @ symbol like we do with all decorators and just call is email right above it. Now, after that, let's go ahead and add is enum. And we will use that with our roles here. So now let's get a little more space and we'll say @is enum, and we can call that, but we need to pass in the values inside of this. So this is going to be an array with these different values. So I'm just going to copy these and put the values inside of that array that we have there. Now that's the first param in our is enum. After that, let's put in the curly braces, and we can provide a message if they don't provide one of the required enum values. And we'll say valid role required. So that goes directly above our role type here. And TypeScript's giving me a warning here, and it's a good thing that it is, because this is not a union type that we put in the array, and I'm still separating it with the same divider that I would for a union type. We need commas here. So let's also replace dividers, and here we now have what our isEnum decorator needs, an array with the different values that we also provided here, but we need to make sure we don't use these inside of there. Okay, after that, we still need to apply a couple of things to the name data that we're getting. So let's bring in is not empty, and let's also bring in is string. So we can apply both of those. So we hadn't done that yet where we're applying two to one type of data. We just do one on each line. So we'll say is string, and we'll call is string. So we check that first. We'll also check is not empty, because we don't want an empty string, which is a possibility. And now this is a good time for a reminder that we don't need to apply any to our update user DTO because it's already extending the partial type of create user DTO. So we've applied all of the validation here, and it will be passed over to our update user DTO as well. And we've applied validation to our DTOs, but we cannot really check the requests that are coming in until we apply the validation pipe. So now we need to go back to our user's controller. We need to bring in the validation pipe. Now we already have the parse int pipe, so we'll just put it right after that. Here we have validation pipe is brought in. Now once we do that, let's go down to the create here, and we'll put the validation pipe right after the body, well, right inside actually the body decorator, where the validation pipe would go. Now this will validate against our DTO, and we'll get messages that will make sense if we have the wrong information, and we'll test that out. Let's go ahead and put the validation pipe also, though, inside of our patch route here where we're sending an update. We already have the parse int pipe here. Then notice we have the body decorator here once again, and we can pass that validation type, or validation pipe rather, right inside of it. So now we have the validation pipe in place for the create under the post method here, and the update under the patch method. So now let's go ahead and try out some requests with those in mind. Let's bring Thunder Client back over, and let's go to the patch route here. Let's patch number 1. Let's try to send an email. Dave, you can see this was different earlier. Let's see what we get here. Oh, we don't have the server started. Let's go ahead and control backtick npm run start :dev. Once we get that running, of course, we can test out our requests, so it should just take a second. Server is now up and running in dev mode. Let's try this again. We're not sending a valid email here. We're just sending my name. Send this, and the message we get back is email must be an email. So if we were to switch this and say dave@davegray.codes and send, then everything looks good, and we're actually getting the updated user back, and the email has been updated to the email that we sent. So that is correct. Let's try something else out. Let's send a different role. Let's go ahead and say role, and let's just say that role is Dave. And once we send that, now we get valid role required with a bad request status. And that is very useful to the user. Now they know what is wrong with their request, not that it's just a bad request. Let's try one more. Let's send something to the name field, and let's try an empty string and send that along. It said name should not be empty. So that specifically related back to that decorator that we said is not empty. Let's go ahead and try something else. Instead of a string, maybe the number 1, 2, 3, send that. Now name must be a string. So all of that validation is in place and working. And we could expect that same validation to work to the post route as well. Let's go ahead and try one here. We are going to post. Of course, this would go just to users. And now once again in the body, we need to send some information here. Let's send name, and we'll say name is Dave. And then for email, let's go ahead and send Dave at, and let's just leave it at that. And then let's send a role, and the role can be one of the valid roles if we want. Let's go ahead and say intern. And let's go ahead and send this. And bad request. Oh, unexpected token. Once again, let me get rid of that extra comma there and see if that fixes it. Yes, email must be an email now. Let's get just a little more room if we can. We could see that better. So email must be an email. Let's switch that back to davegray.codes. And let's switch name now to an empty string, and we'll send that, and we can see name should not be empty. So all of that same validation is applying to both routes to our different classes. Of course, the update user was extended from the create user DTO. Now, all of this in place, we could still have an issue. Say if we went to the users route, sending a GET request, and we just simply request a user like user 99 that doesn't exist. We still get an empty response, and that's not what we want either. And that's where we're going to dive into error handling. So let's take a look at that. Back in the docs, we can see that NestJS has some built-in HTTP exceptions, and we can use those in our code. We're going to specifically use the not found exception. So let's go back and see how this applies. Back in VS Code, I want to go to the file tree and I want to go to my service provider here. I'm going to scroll up because I want to apply this not found error or not found exception inside of the find one, where right now, if we requested user 99 as we didn't receive any message in return to say anything was wrong. So at the very top, once again, we need to import that not found exception. So we will import not found exception, comes from NestJS common, and now we can use that in our code. So I'll scroll back down to the find one. Let's find that. There we go. And now we can just put in a little bit of a logic line here to check to see. We'll say if we didn't find a user. So if we don't have a user, instead of returning nothing, say throw new not found exception, and now we can pass in a message. So here we'll say user not found. And now we could go ahead and try that out because we had that ready in Thunder Client. Let's go back. Let's once again request user 99 and see what happens when we send this. We could ignore the body here. This is just a GET request. Send this. Now we get a 404 not found, and we get the specific message user not found. That's exactly what we wanted. Now, what about when we would send a specific role? So here we could say users, and then we have our role param, and let's set this equal to intern, and of course we should receive something here. Yes, we do. But now let's go ahead and switch this, say Dave, and of course, we're not checking against that in this specific route handler because that's not where we put the validation pipe, because role doesn't have to be sent. We don't know if we're receiving role or not. So if we do, then we just need to check to see if it's found or not. Right now, it just returns an empty array, no other message. That's once again not what we want. Let's go back to our service provider. There we are. And now inside of the find all, where we're checking role, we can add just a little more logic here as well. Instead of simply returning whatever we have here inside, like we are now, where if we have a role, then we are returning this line where it filters for all the users with the role. And of course, it might not find any, and that's where we get the empty array. Let's define our roles array here. So we'll say const roles array equals, and now it may be empty or it may not be, but we have just defined it. And so now we can say if, and there's two different ways you can do this. I say if we check to see if the length is equal to 0, like this, length, it's an array, so it definitely has the length property. That length is equal to 0, that really spells out, it kind of says in the code what I'm doing. The other would be to just flip this with the exclamation mark. So now, if the length was 0, we would flip that value from false to true, and whatever was behind this if statement would also happen. But I'm just going to switch it back because I think more will understand if I say roles array.length equals 0. Then we're going to do something. And what we're going to do is throw new not found exception. And then inside of this, we'll say user role not found. And otherwise, of course, if the length is there, essentially we do have some users with the role that's requested, we're going to return the roles array. Other than that, we can leave this the way it was. So let's save this now, and let's go back and make another request here in Thunder Client. And this would be users role Dave, just like we did before where we had the empty array. Now we send this, and we get the 404 not found with the user role not found message. Much more helpful than simply getting an empty array with a 200 status. Okay, to quickly recap, today we have created DTOs. Those are data transfer objects that we use as schemas, and we can also use them with pipes to validate the incoming request data. And we learned about pipes as well, which are a special type of middleware. And finally, we learned about handling some errors that we might get or we might want to throw on purpose when requests are sent in with invalid data. Now, in the next tutorial, we're going to get rid of our users data here that we used as a sample, and we're actually going to connect to a database with an ORM. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you, And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.